It's recording. Hi guys. So I want to use this video to do what we were going to do in person last class, um, with the demonstration of how to find scholarly research using the resources that are available to you, ones that are open to use, ones that are free. Well, I guess not exactly free since you are paying tuition at Lake County already. So I guess we're just introducing you to something that should give you an idea as to where all that money's going towards, all that tuition money, all those fees you have to pay. So this is, of course, coupled with our conversation a couple weeks ago introducing WP3, our persuasive essay. So, you know, skipping right to the research stuff, we said that for this assignment, we're going to need four secondary sources, and I should put it in writing, but I'm asking for you to find two scholarly sources to include in your works cited page, to include in your bibliography, your collection of research. So the question then becomes, how do I find this scholarly research? What exactly even is this? Um, what makes it scholarly? Why do we have to use this instead of just finding stuff on Google and um, seeing whatever sources pop up from there? Well, for one, the scholarly stuff, if you were in my 1102 class, or sorry, I guess at Lake County, it'd be my 122 class, we would talk about source credibility, right? And ways that we can put together criteria to measure any source against another. And there are five things that we have to keep in mind. The most obvious one, it starts with the author, right? The author of any work writes. Like they're arguably the most important part. They're the one that's giving us the argument. And so understanding who they are already gives us like a baseline understanding as to whether or not they even have the credentials to be talking to us about this subject. And sure, anyone can have an opinion on something, anyone can talk to us about anything, but it's up to us as readers, as researchers, as audience members, to decide whether or not we want to listen. And so, that author, what are we looking for with an author? Well, a few things. Education, right, is pretty much a no-brainer. Do they have a degree in the field which they're writing a paper about? Um, that's the most ideal situation, and we're talking about high-level post-grad degrees, ideally like a PhD, some sort of terminal degree that indicates yes, they are a professional, right? They are an expert. Maybe not quite an expert if they're just out of grad school, but nevertheless, they've put the work in. They've studied the canon. They've studied the fundamentals of this specific field, mind you, not of everything, not of every topic in the world. This doesn't make them an expert in everything, but they have gone through this educational process. And also, there's something to be said too about ethos, right? And this notion that we're going to talk about in our next class with the rhetorical proofs. And with ethos, when you can see that someone has gone through college, taken the time, spent the money to get their education right, it communicates something about that person's character. It communicates something about that person's work ethic. And so it helps to build the ethos, the credibility of that author when they have the education. Now, just because you don't have education doesn't mean you can't still have valid opinions and beyond valid, well researched, well informed, even expertise in a given field. And that's where this idea of experience comes into play, right? Plenty of great minds never went to college, but then they earn their stripes in different ways. And that's through on the job stuff, maybe research um, on their own, right? Using whatever resources they had outside of what's offered at a university or, a junior college. So experience, this idea of like a history of publication as well is also quite an important one. because if they have been producing texts, producing research previously, stuff that's good enough to be published too, not just things that are self-published, not just stuff that they're, posting on their Twitter page. That's another indication that they would score well, right? If we were to put it like on a scale of 1 to 6, 1 being the worst, 6 being the best, they would score the higher ranks if they check all these boxes, right? And of course, there's nuance to all this stuff. Not everyone is going to have a PhD. Not everyone is going to have years and years of publishing their research. Young people getting in the game can still have credible opinions, credible arguments that we can use in our research. And so that's maybe where we consider this next thing. Who's the publisher of the piece, right? What's the publication? And in this world now that's, our digital era, the idea of a publisher has kind of grown um, into something else entirely. Oftentimes, we, instead of referring to it as a publisher, we'll refer to it as a container, right? Because you think about something like uh, social media, you think about something like, internet forums. Um, and these are places where we can self-publish, right? I can post a tweet and I can say whatever I want as long as it's within the community guidelines. They'd probably still keep it up. Maybe they put one of those little community notes down at the bottom. But I can basically say whatever I want on that social media platform. Is it a publisher then, right? Do we think about Twitter as a publisher? Certainly not in the traditional sense, right? In the sense of like newspapers are publications, magazines are publications, books, of course, are published. They go through this rigorous process, editing, revising, making sure that the content that's being posted is as truthful as possible, as accurate as possible, that it aligns with, whatever the publication's ethos is. We don't get that in the self-published sources, right? The self-published sources, there's not that rigorous, hierarchy that you see with these other ones. There's not a team of editors behind the scenes that are making sure everything they post gets various stamps of approval, from the board. But we still think, though, of Twitter as a publisher. It has to be. But that's why we refer to, instead of a publisher, we might refer to it as a container, because it just contains information. It contains thought. It contains opinion. It contains debate, arguments. And yes, you should be thinking to yourself, well, typically a tweet shouldn't be considered anything near scholarly, but also something 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 out of 100, we want to stay away from in our research. Definitely for this project too. Since I'm only asking for 4 sources from you guys, we don't want to use anything from social media. We don't want to use anything, that's like from a blog, nothing that's self-published. We want to make sure that we have this publisher. And so typically we think about publishers that are like, legacy publishers, like newspapers, um, TV networks as well. I think that they broadcast news has its own sort of skin in the game, right? That we can point to and say, yeah, hey, that's they go through this similar editing, revising, approving process before any information is dispelled, ideally. Um, they don't always get it right. No one does, but nevertheless, right, this isn't just like first thing that pops in my head, I'm gonna record myself, post it, and then boom, it's on Channel 7, right? It's on ABC News. It has to go through, different people. So newspapers, magazines less so, I would say. Magazines, it depends on the publication. I mean, something like if we're talking about the New Yorker, we're talking about the Atlantic. These are magazines where we're getting true journalism, right? We're getting pieces that are long form, maybe not wouldn't fit in a newspaper, which traditionally are maybe um, you know a little bit more condensed. We're not going to get the length of a story that we would get in a magazine publication. So it does depend, but still, right? These are classic ones that we talk about. But then what's the next rung up, right? Because again, on our scale 1 to 6, next rung up after ahead of these legacy news um, publications would be these scholarly sources. And so just like newspapers publish journalism, right? They publish, hey, there was a car accident last night in my neighborhood, and somebody on the scene is reporting and talking to eyewitnesses, and then they write the story and post it on their online newspaper website. So newspapers, magazines, depending on the kind of magazine it is, we're typically expecting that they're posting journalism. Maybe the magazine's posting literary stuff, but journalism, right? That's kind of the style of writing, the genre of writing we expect from theirs. Um, Scholarly work, they publish theirs in academic journals, which we consider, of course, the apex of research. These academic journals, these are where the experts, the true experts, not that a journalist can't be an expert, right? An expert, a journalist, again, we're looking at their education, the individual journalist, how long they've been working in the industry, how long they've been writing for a publication. We could certainly make the argument that that journalist just as qualified as any like professor, a doctor who might be working in a similar field, studying a similar thing. But you have to reach that point truly to even be considered for publication in one of these academic journals. Okay, so these academic journals, like I was just saying, like how the newspapers publish journalism, these publish scholarly research. They publish academic materials. So professors, doctors, scientists, just professional scholars, professional researchers in a given field who are doing these long form longitudinal studies, not just, oh, car accident, reporting on the scene, let's get it published by the morning. These are folks that are spending months, sometimes years, studying these subject matters. And so for that reason, we do consider them more of an expert. Their expertise is on a higher level, just because they're committing themselves more so to like a given field, rather than a journalist or another author might kind of like be spread out in all these different categories. Maybe I'm a news reporter, sure, but the kinds of news stories that I'm reporting on, are often nuanced, and there's not just like one thing that I focus on. That's not the case for these researchers. These researchers, their education is in a specific major. The things that they're writing about, that they're studying, are in that same field. And so if they are writing and researching in that field, we consider their work to be top notch. And that's because also the research that they're gathering for their own work is coming again from these academic journals or books, right? Books from like college pressers. College press will, university press will publish longer studies, more comprehensive pieces that aren't just journal articles, which vary from like anywhere from like 10 to maybe 25, 30 pages at the long end. But if it there are of course books as well that would fall under this category of scholarly work. Um, they're peer reviewed, right? So just like we have editors in chief, editors, in charge of various departments at a newspaper that are going to read the work, revise it, make sure it's up to snuff. Um, we get that even more so with the academic journals. The peers, right, that we're talking about is, well, it's the board, the committee that is in charge of the journal. It's other hired, pairs of eyes that are, again, folks that have a history of publication in that specific journal, that have years of experience in that field, who are measuring the work and deciding whether or not it is worthy of publishing in their publication. It's double blind. These journals are double blind, meaning that we remove the name of the author in this auditing process. where we're deciding whether or not to accept their piece to be published. And we ensure that there's no kind of like nepotism or under the table deals going on where it's like, oh yeah, Jimmy's great. That's a great friend of mine. Well, we're just gonna publish him because I'm gonna throw him a bone. He could use some help. He wants to get published. We we remove that to the best of our ability. There are still things that are sketchy, right? There people talk about like pharmaceutical companies will post research for a new drug, and it's all in-house research, right? It's all like their own research team rather than like an outside source that's giving like a truly objective audit of this drug that they're eventually going to try and sell and promote. And what they'll do is they'll do like a pay for play kind of thing. Sometimes money, or more often the case would be they just get a doctor to basically co-sign whatever the journal is saying, and then in return the doctor gets their name included in the byline, right? They get this credit, so it just looks better on that doctor's resume. You know, it helps both parties because, well, yeah, it was in-house research, but then this outside doctor approves of it, and they have had years of experience in this field. So, there shouldn't be this. Don't worry about the conflict of interest, and then the doctor gets to boost their own resume or gets money. But those are less common, right? That's less common, but nevertheless, that's publisher. That's the next thing that we decide. And you're gonna find this, and we'll talk about this next class when we get into like the MLA stuff. You'll find that oftentimes you'll come across research where there isn't an author listed, right? And in the majority of those cases, we then just go to the publisher and we treat the publisher like it is it's a source, right? Or it's the author. We refer to it almost as the corporate author, right? So other ones that we didn't list here that are still usable in your research would be things like, government websites, Census Bureau websites, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where it's just like, a publication of data that are all about, various components of, our workforce here in our country. Um, they have the same thing for justice statistics, right? The Pew Research Center is another one where, again, we're just kind of more recently started publishing articles, but typically same deal. They're publishing just like data sets, censuses, censi, um, sensei. And then the other thing that you'll come across will be lateral research, right? So seeing what other schools are doing, what other universities are doing related to your topic. And of course, those are usable, but anything you're going to find on a university website is typically not going to have an author. So we just list we consider, is it Ohio State? Is it Notre Dame? We consider them the corporate author in those situations. So that's the next thing that we use to kind of measure whether or not something is credible or not. We consider bias, of course. Now, bias is one of these things where we all have bias, right? It's not inherently a bad thing, um, but there are cases where it can be a bad thing, right? Where it can be used to manipulate rhetoric, using rhetoric in this way that's intended to divide, this sort of like one-dimensional rhetoric, right? Where instead of trying to practice two-dimensional or even three-dimensional dialectic, what we're doing instead is we're just suggesting our side is good, your side, the other sides are bad, they are evil, and of course there are varying degrees of how true, how effective these means of using rhetoric in those situations are, but there are more obvious cases where they're just letting that bias really drive every argument that they're making, and they're not making logical arguments. They're not, we can typically see right through those. The far more common case is this idea of a publication claiming to be 100% objective, claiming to just state the facts, when in reality, like we just said, bias is everywhere. There are human beings behind the publishing of these stories. As long as it's not AI generated, which in that case, stay as far as you can away from that kind of source. But all those little decisions, like, okay, maybe we're showing facts, but are we purposefully pushing these facts forward first? Are we using certain language in the telling of this story? Little microcosms, little ways that are meant to have an effect on an audience, meant to skew their opinion one way or another. And the reality is, all of these major media operations do it, right? If you point to any major media company, they're doing it in some way. Some are doing it in more overt ways and probably, more abusive ways, but they're all doing it. And so we should be mindful of that, right? We should be mindful of that. Um, we'd like to believe that the academic journals do the best at showing this sort of bias equity where we're giving kind of like both sides of the story. Of course, I have my argument, my opinion, and I'm going to put that first. Um, but maybe to kind of dispute the other one, I'll also pose the other position, and not doing so in this way that's meant to like use emotional language and make them seem insane and crazy and immoral, unethical. Just attacking the character of a person that would hold the opinion that's the opposite of my own. But that's the idea of bias equity. That's typically what we're shooting for, and just honesty, right? Does it feel like they're being honest about their bias? Are they wearing it on their sleeve? Um, and if they are, then we can typically make the argument that it is usable. Sources, okay, as we'll see here in a moment, while I do a quick demo of how to use the library databases, all of these academic journals, their articles, at the very end are going to have a works cited page, just like we will, all right? Just like I'm sure you've experienced before with doing research papers. You got to put, got to put your works cited page at the very bottom, right? And that's just a list of, hey, this is where I found all of my information. And littered, of course, throughout the text itself, the composition itself, are in-text citations telling you, hey, this isn't my knowledge. This is an argument that I pulled, a quote I pulled, data I pulled from this other author, this other source. So are we getting a works cited page? Even in kind of like, these newspaper examples, right? Journalism examples. Well, they're still on the scene. They're interviewing eyewitnesses, right? They're getting people who have firsthand accounts of what happened, if it's a story like that. Other times they'll still kind of do their own research, and if they're doing it properly, they'll cite those sources. They'll say, hey, according to, this statistics website, according to, this census. However, they're using it in there. They should make mention of where they attain the info. And that's totally different. Sometimes it's easier with this one to think about, well, what would the opposite of that be? The opposite would be some person on Twitter, on social media, or on a blog too. And those blogs can be very deceptive. Some of these blogs are put together in a way where they look like a digital newspaper. They look like a magazine, because just the website design is so impressive. And so they have that kind of at least like aesthetic look of a professional, reliable source. But in reality, they're either just like regurgitating information that you can get from other better sources. Um, more often than not, they're trying to sell you on something. We're always being sold something, right? Because none of these things are just like public domain, public information. Scholarly sources, like we'll talk about, there's subscription services to get those. Magazines, newspapers, same deal. You got to pay to access the articles, right? But there's a difference between like, well, we want you to pay for the content itself, right? Very upfront. You got to pay to like have full access to the information. And what we'll often see with blogs where it's like, here's some information, right? but then we want you to pay for this other service that we do. We do like we do consultations, right? I'm like a mind body health coach, and I do like consultations. So hit me up for that service. Hit me up. Book an appointment with me. That's a red flag, right? That's probably not someone who's a professional researcher. Um, Clearly, they have other motivations for their publication, for their blog, their website, rather than just sharing whatever information you think you can gather from there. Um, and that's it's self promotional, right? They're trying to promote something else. So if they're promoting the piece, if they're promoting the information, they're promoting the content of just like the stories, the articles themselves, that's fine, right? That's not a warning sign. If they're promoting something else, though, it's probably not something we want to use, right? Some sort of like like marketing stuff happens all like I always see that. People will you know they'll want to look up something like the psychology of like of color schemes of like color theory, and they'll come across some like graphic designer's website, and the graphic designer, of course, is trying to sell them on, hey, book me for your next thing, or they're trying to sell you on a book that they wrote. There's better sources we can gather the same information from. They're not saying anything new in their little blog, right? And it's an even bigger issue if they're also not citing their sources. So when we have these people just like talking crazy on the internet and not giving you any information, like any source as to where they're getting that info from, that's scoring the one, right? That's scoring the very poor. Don't use that. And then finally, timeliness, right? We always want to shoot for recency. Um, is something written as recent as possible. There's not really like a rule of thumb that I say works in every single case. If you think about something like Shakespearean literature, for example, yeah, I mean you can definitely use something that was like written from the 1930s, right? If some scholar from the 1930s has a theory that you want to use in your research of Shakespearean literature, it probably still has some merit to this day. Whereas if we're talking about something like psychology, like mental health, the DSM booklet has changed so much even in the last 20 years that anything related to that topic, we're going to want that to be as recent as possible. So I don't know, ideally the last like, it depends on the subject, but ideally last like 5 years, 10 years. Um, yeah, that's typically what I shoot for in my own sort of research. But these five things are just like criteria we can always depend upon to measure sources against each other and decide whether or not they're credible. And so scholarly research is the most credible. It is. And so I'm on our library website right now. I'm going to piece out of the video so I can just show you this. I'm on our library website. I just Google search CLC Library, the little code. I'll post it on our page too. But once I'm here, the first thing I notice at the top is this search bar. So of course, this functions just like any other search engine. Let's say my topic has something to do with mental health. I want to, dig into mental health resources here at the college. Well, first thing I'll do, of course, is tune back in, try to find keywords. This is a difficult part of this process. How do I take my proposal for this paper that's going to end up being, 1,500 words, this letter that I'm writing to somebody? How do I take this and condense it into a nice, neat package, right? Just a couple of words, which is, the process whenever we want to search something. But I think that we've also been spoiled by the AI stuff and how intuitive Google has become, where you could damn near like you can write some jumbled mess. I've been there myself. It's like I'm cooking something, my hands are covered in grease, right? And I'm on my phone. I gotta, the chicken's burning, and I have to, type something into my phone real quick, and I'm misspelling it and talking, and it still picks up exactly what I'm looking for. It's a little bit spooky. But we've been a little bit spoiled by Google in that sense, where sometimes we can give a vague search answer and still get the results that we're looking for. Unfortunately, that's not the case with this search engine. The search engine, um, far less intuitive. Okay, so that is I'm underlining the importance, underscoring the importance of needing to be able to condense our research topic into just like a couple of nice, neat words, right? And so it always helps to start with just like, well, what's like the umbrella topic? If I wanted to research, the guidance counseling services here at CLC and fix something within that, then maybe the umbrella topic would we could start with in the search bar is mental health. So we've done that right here, and we see we've got 1.1 million or over a million results. And that's too many for me to go through. That's far too many. That's insane. We see that as we scroll down a little bit, we're getting journals, which is great, excellent. We're also getting books. I don't anticipate any of us are going to read an entire book for this project. We only have a few weeks left of class, and that's not my expectation ever. Um, but then also, these journals are entire journals, right? This 1940 to 1976, and everything that was published in that period of time. Once again, far too many different articles for me to sift through. So how do I refine my results and maybe knock this 1 million down a little bit? Well, we go to the left-hand side. Um, I always like to do this just in case because this is different at all my colleges that I teach at. The searches they look like this, but there are subtle differences. So like in this, at some of my other schools, I can click it so that I can search online only, um, because as I'm sure you're already well aware of, 99, if not 100% of the research that you will do and other scholars do, it just takes place digitally. There are of course instances where you would be expected to get like physical text, but at this stage in your career's not going to be the case. But sometimes it will want to search for things that are available in the Lake County Library, and we don't care about that, right? That's not what we're looking for. So I like to refine it just in case. Click available online. It probably isn't going to do anything here, and it didn't, right? We're still at over a million. So the next thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to go down to resource type, and I'm just going to click articles. I'm not going to click review articles. That's like oftentimes, well, it could be someone reviewing research that another article is talking about. So it can be helpful in that sense. Other times it's a review of all the sources that an author is using in like a book or something like that. Sometimes it's just a book review. That's not what we want. We want original published articles, not magazine articles, not the rest of this stuff. So articles implies it indicates to the search engine that you want journal articles specifically, right? The scholarly stuff, the academic journal articles. Okay, so now we're starting to see some things. Knock down, about 200K. What we got? Mental health literacy, empowering the community to take better action for better mental health. That sounds like it could hit, right? Empowering the community, right? We're thinking about a very like focused, localized effort for our project, in ways that we could take local efforts to improve whatever this problem is that's persisting. And so, yeah, sure, that sounds like an excellent one, right? That's kind of a we lucked out with a nice hit there at the beginning. But then this one, right-based mental health care lessons from Denmark. Typically, we want to stay within the country in which we are researching, right? Because we are a college in Illinois, in the United States, it's better if we think like not necessarily like regionally. You don't have to just look at like stuff in the Midwest. But I would do your best to stay within the country because oftentimes when we go to another country, there are just there are cultural changes. Sometimes there are changes in legally. There are things that happen in other countries, and in general, there just going to be like trends in research and factors that don't necessarily link up with what we're the variables that we're considering here in the States. So once again, 800,000 is still a lot for us to go through. So what do I do next to continue to try to refine this stuff? I use what's known as a Boolean term, right? This Boolean term. And a Boolean term, really the only one I ever teach, is one of two things. It's either a plus sign, right? So you hit shift equals key and you get that plus, or you just put the word and. And so what that's going to tell my search engine is, hey, look for everything related to this topic and this other thing that I'm going to put in there. And so you ask yourself, well, what else do I want to put in there? How do I refine this further? I like thinking about like the who, the where, the when, sometimes the how, you know. So who are the affected networks? Well, if we're talking about guidance counselors on our campus, maybe I could put them in there, right? Or maybe I could, if they're the people that I'm writing to, if they're my audience and I'm suggesting that they need to switch their moves up, then maybe I could do something like counseling services, right? Or maybe I could do mental health and college students, right? Because that's kind of like the networks of people that I feel like are the ones who are being affected by this. I do my search. Once again, I'm going to have to refine my results. Kind of annoying, got to go back and do the stuff that we did before. But we are already noticing this has knocked it down significantly. So now we're down to 300,000. Great, right? That's much more doable. Um, and we could keep going, right? We could keep it mental health and college students and guidance counselors, right? If you feel like mental health is too vague, then maybe let's just take that out and search like counseling services. Um, or if it's not even related to mental health, do something like academic services, right? If it's more related to kind of like, the transfer process and making sure students are taking the right classes and such. It's a lot of trial and error to try and find the right articles. Um, and so, you do what works best for you. But when you find something that sounds interesting, you'll click that. And, the other thing is that you don't have to read through all of the results. If you get to the third page and you're not finding anything, maybe you need to go back to that search bar and switch things up a little bit. As I just mentioned, it's a lot of trial and error, but I'll click it. This is the next page, this little pop-up that comes up. I'll scroll down to full text availability because we need to be able to see the full text. If I can't have the full text, right, sometimes I'll come across something that's still behind a paywall because the subscription is expired or something or other. I can't access that, right? If you are talking to your friend about a movie that you love, and you ask your friend if they saw that movie, and they said, "No, I didn't see the movie, but I read the back of the DVD cover." Well, can they really have like a real opinion on that movie, right? Can they suggest that they have seen that movie? Definitely not. That's what you'll get behind these paywall ones. You'll get what's known as the abstract, which is just like a paragraph long summary of a 20-page paper that is not going to give you the full context of the research. Sometimes it will tell you like what the results are, but nevertheless, if we're doing this ethically, and I will ask you to put your sources, your works cited pages with a link to the source itself in your bibliography, right, in your works cited page. So doing this ethically, you have to only use work that you've had the full text availability, and have read some of it, right? But the other thing is, like I just said, we're not expecting to go through all the results. You also aren't really expected to read the entire article every single time. If you find something that hits, great. Read that full thing, and use as much as you can in your research. But part of being a good researcher, of being a scholar, is being a good skimmer, right? And so it's like going through, definitely start with the abstract, see if it's even worth your time, see if this is related to what you're going to be getting into. This looks like it's an IMRAD paper, right? Introduction, Methodology, Results, Analysis, and Discussion. So this is like written in a very like formulaic sort of way. And I can just go to the beginning of each section and just kind of like sift through, right? What's the topic sentence? What are these little section headers talking about, right? Reading the beginning of these paragraphs and seeing if any of this stuff is correlating with what my research is exploring. And if it is, great. Read further, read deeper into it. If it's not, move on to the next one, right? So being a good skimmer is an important skill set, an important thing that you'll want to continue to fine tune, along with just being fine tuning your reading comprehension and analytical skills. But yeah, so this is a scholarly article. This is what it looks like if you've never seen one before. As we said before, you scroll down to the bottom, we should see a lot of different cited sources. another little cheat code with this is maybe you come across something where, well, this isn't exactly like what my study is, but hey, perhaps I can use some of their sources if they've used research that does align more so with my topic. Then, let me just go in and do a quick like run through of their sources to see if there's something else that I can take from there. And if I can access that, I get the full text. Bada bing, bada boom, right? I've got a source. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of just kind of you got to jump through some hoops, right? There's some trial and error that's involved, but ultimately you'll continue to do this, right? You'll continue to do this certainly in your college career, and some of us have had this experience already in previous schools, previous education experience, pursuing degrees, which is great. But you'll gosh, it's kind of a bleak one I clicked on. Okay. You'll continue to use this in your lives and perhaps even professionally. That would be wonderful if you guys are thinking about getting into research in that capacity. But nevertheless, for our purposes, we are asking for two of our four secondary sources to be scholarly. The other two, right, just do your classic Google search, find stuff, legacy news media, find stuff from what other colleges are doing, find stuff from government websites. Stay away from self-published, no blogs, no Twitter. And yeah, that's really like the part of this paper that tends to trip people up the most. So I have full confidence you guys are going to be able to write this letter and appeal to this audience member that you're choosing very effectively. But then the research is the part that people tend to kind of lose sight of, and this is really like the most important. I mean, it's all important, but I think it's the most important skill that we're working on with this last writing project. So that's it for my spiel on research, right? I know I kind of condensed, rush through some things there, but yeah. At any rate, I hope that was helpful. And if you have questions at all, then let's talk. And great. I'm going to post this now, and I'll see you guys in our next class meeting.